the basic model is you share what's true for you no matter what it is, and I hold space for you, and then I share what's true for me no matter what it is, and then you hold space for me. We're not trying to come to a shared reality about the politics or the war. That's not the goal. That might or might not happen as a result of the process. The goal is to make more and more space for our experience until we are united in care, irrespective of the stories we hold.
Welcome to Season 15 of Purposeful Empathy, a show that is dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who understand that the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. Thanks so much for watching. Enjoy the show. Welcome to a new episode of Purposeful Empathy. I am joined by David Sauvage, and this is part 2 of a conversation. It's the first time that I'm doing a part 2. This is after 150, maybe closer to 170 episodes over 4+ years of podcasting weekly, because we didn't get to the end of our conversation in under an hour, and there were still some really important pieces of conversation that I wanted to have with you. So thank you for finding the time to meet with me again.
You're welcome, and I am flattered to be the first ever to cause you to do this.
I will, for those of you who have not watched part 1, I'm going to include in the show notes a link so that you can go back and watch it. But for those of you who are joining and don't plan to spend a whole other hour, I'm going to reintegrate into this the intro, so you know a little bit about David, and also the first question, because I asked him to talk about himself a little bit, and he shared his backstory, which I think provides a ton of context for the way the conversation is going to unfold. So we'll do that now. Today, I'm joined by David Sauvage. Do you pronounce it Sauvage? That's how it would be pronounced in Quebec.
Sauvage. What?
Sauvage, great. Who is a teacher and trainer of emotional intelligence and empathy. I went onto his website, and I just want to read out to you how he defines his work. So my purpose is bringing people back to themselves. When you encounter me, you have the chance to engage with what's really, truly happening within you, within your relationship, your community, or your company. I like to teach, perform, write, consult, and listen. I have a deep understanding of empathy, emotions, trauma, healing, and the magic of intuition. You can follow me home. I just love that. So he has consulted for companies to help them integrate empathy into their brands, and he has designed an online course called The Way of the Empath, which I promised to get into. But he's most well known for his performance art, whereby he conducts one-on-one sessions as well as empathic readings. Cannot wait to learn what that's about. He's the founder of a nonprofit organization called Culture of Healing, which produces media and events to contribute to a culture of healing. And most recently, David has been collaborating with an Arab Muslim woman named Kawtar El Alaoui. Is that right?
Yeah, good enough.
To reveal the shadows driving the war in Gaza. Welcome to the show, David.
Thanks. It's nice to encounter you.
I'm really excited to have this conversation. So with that, let's start with could you please tell me a little bit about yourself that brings you to today? Like, who are you and how did you get here?
I'm David. I was born in Los Angeles in 1980 to Pierre and Barbara. I grew up upper middle. I grew up upper middle class, Jewish, relatively comfortable with the weight of generations of Jewish trauma hanging unconsciously over my head. A mother who escaped poverty and found success as a lawyer and passed on the costs and the benefits of that journey onto me. A father who survived the Holocaust as a baby and spent his life paying tribute to the people who saved him, and passed on the costs and benefits of that to me. I was always really both very smart and appreciated for my intelligence. My primary gift was my ability to put things into words, always. I fancied myself a writer, thought that was going to be my life's mission. I studied literature, went to Columbia, graduated, dreamed of becoming a successful screenwriter and or playwright, crashed, burned, went to business school, came out fancying myself as a director, had some success, crashed, burned, and then got interested in what was causing these cycles of crashing and burning beyond my career. And that led me down a healing rabbit hole where I discovered, among many other things, that I was highly sensitive in ways I had been numb to other people's emotional experience, and that much of my pain and depression was the result of absorbing other people's feelings into my body. Found my way through that largely just by learning how to process emotions and then learning how to protect myself and engage more intentional and healthy ways with other people's emotions. And those two threads, me being good with words and me appreciating language, storytelling, communication, came together in all kinds of ways that are still unfolding, from this performance art that I do to this public Jewish, Arab, Muslim healing that I've been working on, to writing again, to just laying on my floor and crying about things that happened 75 years ago.
Mm. I'm so glad I asked that question. Sometimes I start the interview with that, and I'm so glad I did. So much context to the work that you do. And welcome back. David, I want to take my time to on-ramp to this conversation, because I know we're going to talk about some really heavy topics, right? We're going to go into a conversation about what's unfolding in the Middle East. This is being taped on June 11th. The news today is that Hamas has signed onto a temporary peace initiative, or at least a ceasefire initiative. So who knows what will have happened between now and when this goes out into the world. We'll get there. But first I want to share, by coincidence, I don't know if you've ever read this book. Have you ever read this book called Regenerative Leadership?
I have not.
Okay, so I bought it some time ago and just cracked it open yesterday. And I thought, I'm only 18 pages in, but just to rekindle some of what we've talked about yesterday and put us back into that space as a continuation of the conversation, I just want to share a few passages I've outlined and get your reflection, okay?
Cool.
And this is written by Giles Hutchins and Laura Storm. And I haven't read the whole thing, so I can't speak to it, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to love every page. So let me just find the notes that I thought would be really great to read. Okay, so, quote, "We have created production systems that are based on a linear take, make, waste approach focused on immediacy and dehumanization. We've created financial systems based on short-term profit maximization that ignore life and debase human integrity. Our organizational systems are dominated by hyper-competition, power and control hierarchies, and rising stress. In our current environment, the few benefit at the expense of the many. As a culture," I'm skipping a few pages here, "as a culture, we no longer felt a deep empathic connection with life, but instead focus primarily on outer forms of technological innovation and material progress, while deprioritizing inner well-being and consciousness. The separation of inner and outer creates a wounding duality that divorces us from the immense richness of knowledge and wisdom we can only tap into when our inner-outer ways of knowing are integrated." And I think it's just a coincidence that this is what I read on the heels of our conversation. So kind of what comes up for you?
I agree. I guess I can't help but really trivial quibbling, but anyway, I can't stop myself, which is I don't think it is this system comes at the expense of the many for the benefit of the few. I think it comes at the expense of all. And I
Mm.
don't think that the people who you could say are benefiting from this system are doing themselves better than they would be doing in a system that was properly oriented around love and connection and healing. They're suffering too, and mightily. So I think it benefits us to have a little bit more compassion and awareness for the suffering of those who are seeming to benefit from this extremely unjust system. And other than that, um, I would say there's kind of this, is it that the inner and outer split that they're talking about creates a wound or a problem, or is that inner and outer split the result of the wound or the underlying problem? Um, these are like heavy metaphysical, spiritual, psychological questions I don't have answers to, but they
Mm.
seem really sure, and I think it's maybe a little more complex. That said, I agree with what they're saying, and I am on board for a regenerative leadership model.
Thanks for that feedback because it makes me think of metta meditation, right? Which a Sanskrit word for loving kindness, where where you send loving thoughts to people you love as a first pass, then people who you like, then people who you don't know, and then people who have hurt you. And the pushback is, why would I send loving kindness to people who have wounded me, or have caused me pain, or have disappointed me? And I think it really speaks to our capacity. So, there's the ego self, the wounded self that is hurt or angry. And then there's this higher self that recognizes that everybody is working from their level of consciousness. And if they're out banging around in the world, hurting people, exploiting people, maybe some people are doing it intentionally because they just have malice, or maybe they're doing it unconsciously. But there is something to be said, which is hard to do when you're feeling pain, right? And hard to do when you're feeling angry. But to extend this loving kindness to all, because we're why? Why are we extending love to all? Let me ask you.
Well, I'll tell you what I do, because I do a practice like this every morning, is I often, but not always, send love to people who have hurt me or I feel hurt by. Um, and sometimes I can, and sometimes I can't. And when I can't, meaning that in order to do it, I would have to dissociate. I don't do it. I then send love to the part of me that's hurting.
Mm.
So the practice of trying to send love to those who have hurt you brings into relief the places in yourself where you can't do that, where you're still hurting and need love. So I don't think, want somebody to try to send love to somebody that they're really hurt by and don't have love to send yet, means that, oh, you're hurting, you need love right there where you're hurting before you can send love to them. So the practice can awaken you to where you're still hurting.
Mm.
And then on another level, maybe more on the level at which the meditation is coming, um, it's a it's a practice of deepening into what really is. So if I say, well, they suck, am I really saying they're unworthy of love? Do I really want to say that? No, I don't want to say that. What I want to say is, like, I'm hurting, and that's causing me to say that they suck. And so that means that I need care and compassion. And if I can look a little clearer, I see that either the wound that I'm feeling isn't their fault. It's like a wound in me that's being triggered, or I see that they're hurting and they acted in a way that was lacking compassion or care for me because they're hurting in much the same way I'm hurting. And now I can see that, and then the truth that they're worthy of love like emerges. So the practice can get us into the fact that everyone is ultimately worthy of love, and we have a lot of trouble embodying that truth. So metta might be a practice to come to embody that truth. And then even if somebody is acting from malice, like I think that's important that I think we often tend to do two things around people coming from malice. First, we have trouble acknowledging it or admitting it. We're way too quick to say, they didn't intend that, or I'm sure that's not what they meant. And I think oftentimes that is what people mean. I think malice is much more widespread than we're able to face, or at least purposeful avoidance of the cost or the harm that people are doing is more widespread than we're able to face. So I like to look at that as clearly in the face as I can when I encounter it. And at the same time, like malice, the desire to hurt is in itself coming from ignorance. Like malice is a form of ignorance too. It's a lack of recognition of the worthiness of love and care of the person you're hurting or overlooking. So that's what I got to say about that.
So I feel like we are so right away in the sweet spot of the conversation from yesterday. So thank you for joining me there, because I really think it was a rich conversation, and here we are again. So one of the questions that I wanted to ask you is that you went to a Trump rally a month ago and you learned about the fervent Trump supporters. And I think you have a lot to say about how you think empathy could help bridge the gap of the insanity in politics right now, south of the border, but also elsewhere in the world.
Sure. Well, first, just to be clear, I am not a Trump supporter. I did not vote for Trump. I will not vote for Trump. And I uh, feel a lot of the revulsion that most people who don't like Trump feel. Um, and I went to a Trump rally with my friends because I was really curious to see what it was like. I've wanted to go for like probably like 8 years. Like, what is going on over here? Like, what is really going on? And when I drove from my house in the Hudson Valley 4 hours south to Wildwood, New Jersey, about a month ago, where Trump was holding a rally on the beach. And my first impressions were that it was underattended. I was ready for huge crowds and chaos, and we got there at 5 o'clock. The rally was scheduled to start at 5 o'clock. There were no lines. It took not even 5 minutes to get through security. There was a long walk through an empty beach to get to where the rally was taking place. There were barricades set up to crowd control that were totally unnecessary. So the impression that Trump is giving and that the news media accepted, which is that there were thousands upon thousands of people there, is untrue. There were maybe 4 or 5,000 people there. And the other impression I got pretty quickly was that these people here weren't all that enthusiastic. I was expecting a rabid crowd of Trump drunk fanatics. And instead, it felt like I was going to a concert of a band that was popular in the 90s and has some hits that people still love, and the fans are still showing up to hear the hits, but nobody thinks it's the hot thing anymore. That was the vibe. Um, and the enthusiasm was muted. A little bit like people were a little bit detached, maybe a little bit bored. And a couple other things that I noticed were that um, they had this normal politician, like the governor of, I won't even name the state because I can't remember and I don't want to get it wrong, but some Republican governor giving a fairly generic speech about the importance of cutting regulations and economic prosperity through a Republican perspective. And this crowd could not have cared any less about what he was saying. It was the most irrelevant blather to them. And it became so clear that these people, and I guess in this sense, I would include myself, have no more tolerance for political conversation. Like the pretend game that we collectively play, that policy is primary, these people are over it. And I think in a lot of ways we should all be over it. And in that sense, they're a step ahead. We know that policy is just a proxy for deeper cultural, spiritual, emotional forces. And Trump is advanced in the sense that he truly grasps that. Maybe all autocrats grasp that, but I really felt that. And when he finally came on, he doesn't speak in terms of policy and politics. He speaks in terms of winning and losing. He speaks in terms of hot dog prices and how people feel and how stupid people are and how great he is. And there's something about his irreverence in talking about this fake, sacred BS politics that we're all in a more honest way by dismissing it out of hand as silly and a power game that resonates naturally with people who are sick of being misled. The tragedy, of course, that most of us who are not Trump supporters see quite clearly is that they are being misled once again. What I felt is that they were open. The energy there, contrary to what I would have expected, contrary in a way to what I wanted to believe, was this is not a group of rabid, closed-minded racists worshiping a demon. This was a group of lost folks looking for something to believe in that spoke to them. And if you could speak to them, they would be available to it. And to speak to them means to speak in such a way that they feel like you get them. And Trump actually gets them. He actually does. And they actually feel gotten. And all the rest of it is details. And the need to feel gotten is so much stronger in so many people than the need to have policies that, for the most part, they don't understand and probably, even if they did, don't care about, get enacted based on some highfalutin theory of right and wrong. Instead, it's more like, oh, he feels me, I feel felt. Let's do this. I don't care what he's talking about in terms of any policy, even in terms of like getting rid of democracy. What is the point of democracy if I don't feel felt right now? What is the point of voting if I don't feel felt? The whole point of voting is to give me the sense that what I feel matters. And since I don't get that sense from our democratic process, I'm going to go with this anti-democratic figure because I feel felt by him. And then in my few interactions with people, I found them surprisingly open, surprisingly willing to share what was really driving them, and surprisingly curious about me and my friend, who they could mostly tell, the ones we interacted with, weren't there in support of the cause. They got it, they felt it, they knew it. And they didn't care. They were welcoming, you know? And there was one guy, and my friend Yvonne was asking like really what's going on? Like, why do you support Trump? And it was a long, convoluted answer, but I think at the end of it was basically this sense that in this one man's case, it's totally small sample size, but I'll speak for him. His sense was that his grandfather, who fought in World War II, and what his grandfather stood for in fighting for World War II is not being sufficiently honored. And there's this lack of gratitude and appreciation for the sacrifices of that generation and for the sacrifices of patriots for this feeling of freedom that he believes he enjoys that is not being honored by anybody but this by Republicans and by what we might think of as the most virulent strain of Republicanism. And he feels like he's being honored through that strain. And you can say, well, that's ridiculous. Trump is anti, doesn't even respect the military. Or you could say that's ridiculous. Republicans don't actually respect American history in a real way. However, if we can also acknowledge that there is in the on my side of the equation an automatic knee-jerk dismissal of that kind of psychology as antiquated and naive, then you can feel why he needs to go the other direction. And I can feel in myself a dismissiveness toward that kind of American sacrifice patriotism idea. Like I feel judgment. I feel like get over it. I feel like what are you talking about? I feel like what about African Americans? I feel like what about women? I feel like saying all of those things, and all of those things are going to make him run away. And so what I need to say if I'm going to persuade this person to take in a wider context that holds the experience of marginalized folks is I need to hold his experience in feeling that the great American tradition is being stepped on. And understanding, of course, that that great American tradition being stepped on is actually just a stand-in for him as a white guy doing his best to hold together a family in economic trying times, with a sense of pride and machismo that's real, that needs to be seen, honored, and appreciated, not just dismissed as toxic masculinity, though it has that. So, and he was open to it. Like he could, if he were hearing this, he would be nodding. He'd be like, "Yeah, you got me," and then it would make space in him for the fear I feel at the thought of a dystopian Trumpian autocracy that seems to me to be somewhere between likely and inevitable at this point. And I feel fear and anger around that. And he would dismiss that until and unless I held his experience of feeling dismissed by wokeism. And we just need to, somebody needs to go first. Somebody needs to go first and say, I hear you, I see you, I feel you. And then the other person, when they feel that that's genuine, they'll come to our side and the tension will release over time.
Okay, so if somebody needs to go first here, so okay, I'm with you. I'm loving what we're
Yeah.
talking about. And we're going to talk about Israel Palestine soon, which is going to even take it up a notch. Somebody's got to go first. And I think the thread that you're suggesting of somebody's got to go first is it's the person who is marginalized, who's been disenfranchised, who's been burdened, that has to go first to empathize with the person who's had power and is feeling like they're falling from power. That's what the critical
Mm.
is thinking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you mean that?
No, in fact, I'm exactly not saying that.
Okay.
The person who goes first is the person who has space. The person who goes first is the person who has a regulated enough nervous system to hold the experience of the other. So I'm not
Regardless of
asking,
positionality, regardless of privilege.
absolutely regardless of privilege. Like I am not asking uh a 18-year-old black guy to hold the emotional experience of a white cop arresting him. That is insane.
Right.
Um, and a perpetuation of the cycle. But I am saying that those of us who are coming into the truth that everyone's experience ultimately needs to be held, or that everyone is ultimately worthy of love, those of us who are coming into that truth in our bodies, not just intellectually, but like can feel it, we are going to have space for people that other people are not going to have space for. And I personally do have space for racists. I personally do have space for anti-Semites. I personally do have space for this toxic, masculine, hyper-independent American archetype that is enabling Trump. I would have space for Trump. And so I invite those of us who do have that space to hold those people's experiences so that they have more space for the marginalized. And then some people who are marginalized are also quite spacious. And if there are, and of course there are Black people who have done sufficient amounts of healing on themselves who really can hold the emotional experience of a white racist cop. And that is a transformative power. I'm not telling that person to do that. I'm not telling that person to do that. I am standing in awe of them when they reach that level of development and can do that the way I genuinely feel I could do for an anti-Semite as a Jew. So it's like, can we get there?
And that is the work ahead of us, is to grow the critical mass of people who are healed, sufficiently healed.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So let's talk, because you're Jewish and you've done a lot of work on Jewish trauma. And 6 months ago, you began working with an Arab Muslim woman named Kawtar El Alaoui. And the intention of that work was to surface shadows, I put that in quotes because I think that's your word, of the war unfolding in Gaza. Now, I want to unpack a bunch of different things there. And I want to start by saying that I'm a big fan of Brene Brown, and I'm a big fan of Gabor Mate. And some time ago, I guess maybe 2 months ago, Brene, who'd come out of sort of a bit of what I perceived to be a burnout, or sort of took herself away from the public eye for a moment, came back and said she felt called to put out a statement on what's going on in the Middle East. And this is a few months ago. So we're June 11th now. So let's say in April. And I think it was Gabor Mate's son that put out a video explaining why, critiquing why her statement was not cool, essentially. And I could hold both of like her statement and his critique together. And it was interesting for me because I've often thought about, when is the day going to come where somebody's going to publicly say, Anita, you have a book on purposeful empathy and you've said nothing.
Hmm.
And at the same time, I've been so afraid to speak out because of the shrapnel on both sides, and what that could mean. So I feel like you are a bit of a gift and a blessing, because when I watched the video of the work that you did, I was like, oh, that is something that I so fully can get behind in terms of the work that needs to get done to see any traction. So before we share the video, because I want to embed that here so everybody who can see it, everybody who's listening can watch it and understand what we're talking about, I'd like to maybe ask you a little bit about the work you did on Jewish trauma and healing from Jewish trauma, to give context to your journey, to what you just said, which I thought was super powerful.
On my dad's side, he lost a lot of his family. My both my grandparents survived the Holocaust in hiding on my dad's side, and my dad didn't find out, wasn't told he was Jewish until he was 18. He grew up in a shroud of grief and avoidance and mystery. And then by the time I came around in 1980, he was, certainly in the years after I was born, he was singularly focused on telling the story of how his parents survived and of the Christians who saved Jews during the Holocaust. And I also grew up with this heavy shroud around me that I didn't understand, and it's still with me. I haven't cleared it. You can even hear it in my voice. I mean, there's a depth to me that is just David and me, and then there's a depth to me that is like the Jewish trauma body speaking through me. And it usually shows up in the culture as a kind of bemused, neurotic irony, see colon Seinfeld. But there's also this like a more rabbinic Jewish trauma response, that you can hear in my voice. So I mean, it's to say it's deep is an understatement. So a lot of my work around healing has been around processing the grief that my grandmother, in particular, my dad's mom, as far as I can feel, never felt herself, and unwittingly passed along to her children. My father, one of the three, who unwittingly passed it along to me. And I can feel it now. Uh, and so I have been crying tears for lost relatives I never met for years now, when it's right to do. And I have been also working to integrate the wisdom of the religion, which for many secular Jews is the baby that gets thrown out with the bathwater. Um, like there is a deep wisdom tradition in Judaism that I wasn't interested in, um, because it was understandably associated with all of this mess. So as I've healed some of this mess in myself, I've been letting in what Judaism has to say. And I've also been holding retreats and workshops for Jews to process what's going on right now and to process old trauma that we're all sharing. And I've held really uncomfortable conversations with Jews, so uncomfortable that it's even uncomfortable to say what they were about, but I'm going to say it because I like taking risks. I've held really uncomfortable conversations with Jews only about our relationship to money and how that is a cover for so much trauma and how scared we are to talk about it because of how it feeds into Jewish stereotypes and anti-Semitic tropes. And I just like to go into all the stickiest and most uncomfortable places.
Yeah. And the healing, I would guess, is still unfolding.
It's going to take quite a while.
Yeah.
You know, it's a couple. I mean, the Jewish trauma arguably starts at the origin of Judaism, which is the relationship between God and Abraham. And basically, their relationship consists of, hey, Abraham, I'll take care of your ancestors. You just have to leave your land and everything you've come from, and also slice off your foreskin. Deal? I mean, that's a bad start to a relationship. And I don't think Abraham went through a process of grieving either his foreskin or his land. And so we are thousands of years later still trying to process that separation, which we keep replaying in this Jewish diaspora. This, like, there's no land, there's no place for us. We keep getting displaced from our very origin. And then Israel being finally this place that is promised to us that then we now have in some kind of, nation state model. So
And all that you say can coexist. So it's an and. You know that there's trauma that's unfolding for another group of people, and has for a long, long time. And you can hold both of those as being true.
yeah, I mean, I go, yes, definitely, and I can go further than that. I can feel the the way in which the Jewish trauma is perpetuating uh, trauma,
Yeah.
and I can feel, and Qatar has helped me to feel the ways in which the trauma of the Muslim psyche, and now I'm entering into really dangerous territory. But I'll just take one extra step, how some of the trauma of the Muslim and the Arab Muslim psyche is also playing into the conflict, independent of what the Jews are doing or what the Israelis are doing.
Right, because they're on a journey too.
They're on a journey too.
So tell me a little bit about the work with Qatar, before we go in and slip in this 10-minute video.
Um, it's me and a quite amazing, emotionally aware woman sitting together. We've done a little bit of it in private, but most of it we've done in public on Zoom with 100 or so people watching. And we've done 3 conversations like this. And we start with the question, how are you really feeling right now about the war? And I give my full answer, or she gives her full answer. Whoever has more space listens first. Whoever's more charged speaks first. And then whatever my answer is, when she's in space holding mode and vice versa, of course, her job or my job is just to make compassionate space for the other person's experience, whatever that is. especially when that experience is anathema to us, especially when it triggers us. That's when we actually have to make an extra special effort to hold space for their experience. And then we switch and process what it was like, what our experience of the war is like, and also what it's like to hear your experience. And so it's the basic model is you share what's true for you no matter what it is, and I hold space for you, and then I share what's true for me no matter what it is, and then you hold space for me. We're not trying to come to a shared reality about the politics or the war. That's not the goal. That might or might not happen as a result of the process. The goal is to make more and more space for our experience until we are united in care, irrespective of the stories we hold.
United in care. And that would be for both of you as protagonists in the conversation, but also, I guess the thesis is that people who are listening might also benefit from the dialogue and the holding of care space.
Yeah, that it shows them. I mean, I'll just give an example that demonstrates that. So, um, one thing that emerged for me was when I was trying to feel and see the pain that Qatar was experiencing around watching Arabs have horrific and unbearable things happen to them at the hands of Israelis. And I was trying to be with her in that. I could feel that I couldn't be with her in that fully because it felt like I was betraying myself. And so I was like, I want to meet you, but this is my limit. And then she very carefully and thoughtfully asked, like, what's there? Like, what's the limit? And I feel like, well, if I meet you fully in how horrible what's happening is, I feel like I'm abandoning my whole tribe, quite literally tribe. And until the cycles of violence that led to this last cycle of violence that you're receiving are held, I can't abandon myself to meet you fully. And just like saying that, like I can feel how that it touches something so deep in so many Jews that it like can bring about like a relaxation, like, oh, okay. Because there's a lot of Jews who probably wish they had more compassion, but don't have it and feel guilty. And there's probably a lot of Jews who don't have that compassion and don't care that they have that compassion and are now getting a window into why they might lack it that will feel affirming too. And then for people who are horrified at what's happening and can't understand why these horrible Israelis don't get it, now they have a window into it that's being offered to them like without antagonism. And it models, Qatar and I are modeling like what it means to take the full depth of the wounding and trauma that's giving rise to this horrible but ultimately surface level conflict, what it's like to give that the attention and care and love that it needs to actually resolve. And we don't have a model for that at all in the culture. Like there's nothing that is offering that model. So it's like, oh, there is a way. And Qatar likes to say that like peace is the destination, that the journey is healing. And right now, we don't even have that model. Right now, our model is peace is the destination, and the journey is international diplomacy run by emotionally immature, mostly men, sitting around boardrooms making decisions for millions of people they don't understand. That model is transparently flawed, but there isn't an alternative model. So we're like modeling an alternative model, which gives like hope, I think, to
So
those of us looking for another way.
So here's where I'm going to drop it in. We're dropping in the video so people can actually, it's not in the theoretical anymore. They can actually see it unfold.
Welcome to How We Make Peace. A Muslim and a Jew demonstrate radical empathy. I am one of your hosts, Andy Swindler, and I'm joined by my wife and co-host Rachel Zargo, and by Kawtar El Alaoui and David Sauvage, my dear friends. who are Muslim and Jewish, respectively, and who felt compelled at my invitation to create a space of emergence to explore an alternative to war and hate.
We need to recognize that both identities hold deep trauma and pain, both of which needs to be given voice if we are to find our way out of the grips of this war and back to sanity and humanity.
We are moving toward what's uncomfortable, not away from it, up to our capacity to hold it.
David and I have developed the ability to hold what we see as opposite truths, but with deep care.
I would like all the comfort of Israel without any of the moral reckoning. Please. Can I just get that? Says this cold, numb energy part. And now I'm feeling warm and faintly nauseous.
Mhm.
And I'm seeing these horrible images that I've seen of Gaza flooding my brain. It's like a can't, I actually can't hold it, can't face it.
I'm hearing the dual experience of seeing and not wanting to see.
That's
Seeing,
where I'm at. I'm
like,
seeing and not wanting to see.
well, let's acknowledge that even the parts that doesn't want to see is probably trying to serve some purpose for you.
I feel trapped, like I'm abandoning myself, or like I'm being abandoned, or like I'm giving space to the other side.
Look at me, David. I am the other side.
It's like I'm hearing anti-Semitic chants.
Hmm.
So hard to dig this shit up. Oh man, it's so hard to dig this shit up.
Yeah, I can relate to that. To me, it feels like you just want to continuously run away and there's nowhere to go.
Or worse, I just want to plant my flag and be like, this is my land. You run away now. I'm done running away.
I want to scream. I want to yell. I feel deeply, deeply rageful and angry right now. How dare you not take care of your trauma and put it on me?
What's that like for you? That I'm putting my trauma on you?
It makes everything in me that wants to be nice just feel like it's about to get hijacked. And I just want to say, whatever it's going to take, I'm going to make you hear me. I want you to see the people that are dying every day who don't deserve it. I want you to stop calling everyone a potential terrorist and a threat. I want you to stand with me when the media are calls me names and projects on me that I don't have the right to speak, and that the only things that come out of me are violence. I want you to stand with me and say, no, there's a different narrative. Those of us who want to be seen as not violent, those of us who want a different way. And I touch the helplessness of holding that in my psyche and not knowing what to do about it as a Muslim.
What is the narrative you want me to work to change? Or what is the new narrative you want me to help establish with you?
Let's talk about the narrative that here we are together. Yes, the past happened and it was terrible and shitty for all of us. And generations after us are going to pay for it. But let's start with the narrative that while there may be elements in the Muslim psyche and experience that only know violence as a way to speak, there are so many of us who are willing to hold hands with you. Let's make us visible. And let's stand together instead of opposite each other all the time.
There was this numbness, and Kawtar held me and guided me until what was there underneath the numbness was this split in me. On the one hand, this witness, horrified, nauseous witness, who is seeing reluctantly what is happening and the bodies sacrificed for it. And on the other side, this belligerent and injured victim of generations of anti-Semitism. And I was feeling trapped in that tension. And the other part that came right in was to acknowledge that your trauma is as real and as meaningful as mine.
But there was times where I received it, and inside of me, what was speaking was this sense of, that's too comfortable for you. I need to push you further to truly see the depth of my experience. And that's what I gave voice to. It was this sense of, I'm done making you comfortable. And it's not really fully true, but at least I reached a new level of full disclosure. I want to be clear that for me in doing this work, the reason that's important is that's what actually frees up the trapped energy. That's the shadow part. And it's giving voice to that shadow. It's developing the courage to be with that shadow, giving it voice, that then makes us come back to caring for each other.
When you start to see that side taking is part of the problem itself and doesn't resolve the underlying tensions, even in the most extreme cases. And so then you enter naturally into the place Kawtar and I are holding, which is where sides start to feel less clarifying and more confusing. And what we're really witnessing isn't sides so much as energy flows and emotions and traumas and confusion and human beings and land in a big, messy dance that our hearts are going to need to find their way out of.
And I think as a collective, we really have no choice but to develop the muscle to have those conversations. It's our only way out of this. And we cannot shift this cultural narrative without each one of you that's going to step in and support the next steps.
This work is happening in emergence. Thank you all for your heart, your presence, and participation. And please take good care of yourself.
The idea would be to connect with policymakers, to connect with media, and to connect with whatever magic wants to unfold.
I believe we have the ability within 2 generations to heal this conflict. And it starts with making this the mainstream conversation.
And now I'm going to come back to our conversation having seen the video. And I guess the question I want to ask is, I think it takes a fair bit of courage for the two of you to have that conversation. Not only if you were doing it by yourselves, sitting down as friends, but also to do it publicly. Because I could just imagine all the shit that's being fired at both of you across the entire spectrum of opinions that exist out there. So why is this work so important, and why do you want this to catch on? And where do you find the courage?
It takes more courage for Kawtar than for me. I know that because she's more scared than I am stepping into it. And there's, we're inside the identities of the conflict, but we're also in a male-female dynamic too, that I think is harder for her on her side of the equation than for me. It is generally easier for me to say hard things that people are going to find offensive than it is for her to say hard things that people might find offensive. And I think that has a lot to do with cultural gender dynamics that I accidentally benefit from. But for me, like it does take, to give myself some credit, it does take some courage to surface this, especially these cold, violent parts of myself that I'm watching enacted in Israel. And where do I find the courage? Where do I find the courage? I find it through my ancestors. They want resolution. And we've lost connection to our ancestors collectively, and they are available to support us and to say and to be felt in, I've got you. Like I can feel my grandfather, my dad's father, like as a supportive presence being like, I got you. And I can feel like in my case right now, like a lineage of Jewish men, just like, thank you, like, please. So I feel this multidimensional transpersonal support that gives me courage. And then I lost your other questions. What do I hope people get out of it? Is that it?
Yeah. But two little seconds. Something just came alive for me. So I think for what it sounds like to me is profoundly spiritual work.
Yes.
And I think the implicit invitation is that we become more spiritual.
I think maybe I think the implicit invitation, maybe that is an implicit invitation. That's not how I think about it. I'll say how I think about it, but I don't think you're thinking about it. Maybe you're just thinking about it differently. It's to become more present. And like when you ask me like where do I get the courage? Like, oh, where do I get the courage? And then I just like closed my eyes and saw what was arising. And it's like, oh, that's where I get the courage. And it is a spiritual answer, but I'm not trying to be more spiritual. I'm trying to be more present. And then spiritual truths are emerging through that presence.
And after the conversation that you have, I suppose you debrief, or you take some time maybe to let it integrate and then debrief.
Oh, yeah. I eat popcorn. I watch really dumb shows. I like chocolate with like almond butter in the middle of it. You know. We do debrief, like, whoa, what was that for you? And we process anything left unprocessed. And then we appreciate like the shift. I feel like you're feeling the shift. You're in it. Like it's like I'm putting my finger on something. We're putting our finger on something together that's really hard to put our finger on, but is also really obvious if you can see it. Like, oh, whoa, whoa, whoa. There's like this opening here. And we appreciate that we're navigating that opening. It's so hard to see, but then so obvious when you see it.
Yeah, because I felt when I first clicked on it, I was wondering, like, I'm not typically a skeptical person. I have, I believe really good things about people as sort of my MO. And there was a little part of me, I don't know if it was an intellectual part or part of like a psychological, I don't know. I think I was kind of like, is it gonna meet the sniff test around, is this like performative or like, but it as it unfolded, and especially after hearing Kawtar respond, and then the more two voices that I heard, the more I felt like there's something healing about how much care was held between you through something so fraught and so like many generations of pain.
In the language of my ancestors, amen, like yeah.
Okay, so David, at the end of my interviews or conversations with guests, I like to close with a question. And thank you for yesterday's conversation, today's conversation. Good lingering, good lingering. Let me ask, this is a podcast about empathy and purposeful empathy. So I wonder if there's a time in your life that you can think of when somebody, gifted you empathy and what that meant for you. And it could be about the conversation with Kawtar. It could be anything else in the world.
These conversations with Kawtar have really been healing in that way. Um, I'll share something that was really meaningful recently. Um, I was in a pretty intense and quite beautiful 6-month romantic relationship with an amazing woman that ended in challenging ways for both of us. And we've been trying to hold each other's experience and repair and consciously uncouple now after a rocky moment. And we were getting somewhere and it was getting really dicey. And she sent me a message. This is such a small example, but it made such a difference to me. She sent me a message asking for something really important from me. And my response was misaligned. I wasn't listening. I couldn't quite, I wasn't with it. And she was really, really hurt by my non-responsiveness or my whatever, the inadequacy of my response. And then I told her that my mother has been going through a major health scare that landed at the same moment that her message did. And that's why I was misaligned. And to feel her receive that and be like, oh, I see how much your mother's health impacted you. I see that that's why you didn't respond in a way I needed. I see that the hurt that I'm feeling is partly coming from a projection onto you that you don't care, when the truth is you do care. You're just overwhelmed. I'm going to do the work of taking back that projection, seeing that you care, seeing that you're overwhelmed, and holding myself as much as I can, she is, while you continue to process your situation with your mom. And then we can come back to this when you've got more space. And that was like the amount of relief to be seen in that was really a lot. Um, so it's a good small example of just like, oh, this woman gets how much stressed out I am, and she's willing to adapt to that compassionately. It's like inside a romantic, messy dynamic. What a relief. I still feel
Yeah,
it now as I talk about it.
give you the benefit of the doubt, and I'm sorry to hear about what your mom's going through. I have to say, I don't know you at all. Like, we never met before yesterday's Zoom call. And I believe you when you say that you're like, you may do important work and that people may perceive you as, whatever, an aura of healedness. And then you're like perfectly like inadequate in other spaces. You know, you said that the other day, and I thought that was like full of self-awareness. It still feels, despite knowing that about you, it still feels pretty delicious to speak to someone who has, well, an amazing grasp of the language to be able to actually articulate what you're saying. But I sense like an evolved, healed person. And it's really nice to have that kind of conversation. Someone who's been there and done that, you know, and still doing it. And man, it's like it would be so cool if we could all do that. It would be really cool.
That makes me happy to hear. I'm smiling for those of you who are just listening. I'm smiling hearing that. And I really appreciate you for wanting that and saying that. And like, I am so with you in that. I want that too. It seems like we both want a world that is oriented around authentic emotional connection and empathy.
Well, count me in if you decide that you want to scale your empathy pop-up to Montreal. I'd be happy to collaborate. I'm going to be in New York in the fall. I hope we meet in person, maybe do something fun.
That would be fun. Yeah, come say hello.
Yeah.
And also Qatar's in Ottawa. That's not too far from Montreal, is it? I don't know.
No, not at all. It's our capital city, 2-hour drive. I might reach out to her.
Oh, she would love that. Yeah, she would be a great, I recommend her. Yeah.
I think it would be an important continuation, they say.
Ce serait parfait.
Yeah. Oh, voilà. David, thank you so much. And I must end on shalom.
Shalom.
Really appreciate it. Thank you to everyone who's been listening and watching. And if you didn't watch the first episode, please go back and rewatch this one. And thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you too, Anita.
We will see you next week or hear from you at Purposeful Empathy. Thanks so much for watching another episode of Purposeful Empathy, a show that is dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who understand the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. So now the invitation is to subscribe to the channel and consider picking up a copy of Purposeful Empathy. Thanks again for watching. Have a great day.